welcome to episode 5 of Starting a Startup. Pretty soon I'm going to run out of these fingers, but until then, I'm going to continue building on Pocket Investor, the greatest real estate investment calculator ever. You may be working on an application right now and you need user authentication. If you follow along with me in this video, I'll show you how to build a very simple, straightforward user authentication using JSON Web Tokens, JWT. So in this episode, I'll work on my application Pocket Investor and update my sign up and my sign in page so that I can start to integrate with user authentication using JWT. With that said, let's do this. Now, because JWT or JSON Web Tokens is the star of this episode, I'll waste no time in installing it. In essence, JWT allows us to represent objects as a string token. As this project is getting larger, what I want to do is rearrange the folder structure by creating a utilities folder within my server directory, and then move the database connection script into the utilities folder. And having moved that, I need to then update the reference path within wherever I was previously referencing the database connection. And so here I'll prefix this with utilities /db connection. So that's still imported, and I check to make sure it still works. With that accomplished, what I want to do now is create a helper file that will contain the logic for how to interact with JWT, JSON Web Tokens. So I will import JWT here. And then I will also create a reference to cryptology library by typing crypto, requiring that into the project. And now I'll start to create the set of functions that interacts with JWT. The purpose of Encrypt Password is to take a plain text password and add some salting to it in order to create a hashed encrypted value of the password. And we'll use that encrypted password to save to the database, and as well as to check whenever the user is trying to log in to ensure that the plain text password does match with what we have stored as a hash. Next, I'll write the logic for interacting with JWT. Now, the creation of JWT is going to take in a function that we want to represent as a string token, and then we'll take in the quantity of time in minutes that we want this token to live for. So right now, I'm just going to set that for 24 hours. JWT is cool because it's stateless, meaning that nothing is ever stored in the server's memory, but rather a token is generated for the user and can be encrypted and decrypted in order to identify who the user is. So here to create it, I'm passing in the object that I want to sign. Then I'm going to create a server-side environment variable that's going to represent my secrets on my server. I'll save that. And then back here, after entering the secret, I'll then indicate how long I want this token to live for. The object that will be signed and converted into a string token will be the user's name, ID, and any other relevant information that I want to store within the token. When the function is done doing its thing, all that's left is to return to the user the string token. So that's the creation of a JWT, JSON Web Token, but I also need a way to take in a known string token and validate that it is a valid string token that is recognized by my server. So I'll need a function that's called verifyJWT that takes in the string token and checks it against the JWT secret that's in our environment variable and validates that indeed it is a valid string token. Upon validating that we do have a valid token, what the function will then do is return the decoded version of whatever was previously encoded as the previously signed object. It'll then return it back to the user. And just a quick note that both of these functions, verify JWT and create JWT, are both asynchronous functions. So I'm going to continue to keep my code nice and organized by creating a folder within my API routes. And in this folder, I'm going to then export a function called sign up. And sign up is going to take a payload of a user that needs to be signed up. Here I just want to make sure it's still working by returning some dummy information. And then I'll check that by hitting the route. And it should return, yes, hello from sign up. Now what I want to do is make sure that from my sign up page, when the user enters the name, their email, and password and hits submit, I want this information to be submitted over to the route that I just created. Programmatically, what this means is that whenever the user hits the submit button, we need to call a function called submit form, and then I'll update the user object within the data field here to email and password, and then vmodel those using email and password. And so now the user object contains all the necessary information to sign up this user. With that out of the way, I heard it's good practice to always test out your code. So enter my dummy information and make sure I'm receiving what I expect. And I have the name, password, email. And so that's working as expected. Let's move on. All right, so once I have the user's sign up information, I'll then send this over using fetch to API/user/signup using a method post, and then I'll specify the body, which is going to be the user, and then specify that this is going to be a JSON data submission. Fetch is an asynchronous method, so I'll need to prepend a wait prior to response.json so that it converts and resolves completely prior to proceeding. Back in my API/signup, I need to make reference to the documentation and copy these import statements in order to have access to what is submitted through the request, and then I'll copy the query body and cookies for later use. Because I'm using a wait within this function, I'll need to mark this function as async. All right, so now what I want to do is continue to further build out my folder structure by adding a logic folder here. And then within this logic folder, I'll create a file called user, and this will hold the entirety of the logic that handles anything related to user functionality. So here I'll make sure to go ahead and import this newly created file, because from here I'll be then calling the functions that I export within logic/user. When a request hits this route, I'll check to see what type of request it is, whether it's a post or a get, and then I'll call user sign up, and I'll pass in the body of what is submitted. At which point I'll import within my logic function the database. In all my functions, as early as possible, I like to make sure that whatever is passed in is valid, and if it's not, I exit. And then I'll also import the auth helper. As I'm signing up this brand new user, I'll make sure to give this user and others a unique salt, which is going to be a random array of strings that's going to be 16 characters in length. Then I'll convert the currently plain text password using the salt into a hashed version of a password that's encrypted. Then I override the previously plain text password. Next, I'll be using a multi-line SQL statement to check how many users are currently using the application, and as well as does this user that's wanting to sign up, does their name, their username, or their email currently exist within the database? Now, the result of this multi-line SQL statement is going to be an array of objects. Like we see here, we have an array that's covered by another array that contains objects. So naturally, if the user does not exist, I will go ahead and create a record of the user by allowing them to sign up. And I'll do that using a function I created that will be a subject of a separate video called dbModify. This function takes in a object that has two keys, the table that I want to insert a record into or modify a record of, and values that are to be inserted or updated within the table. I'll go ahead and add a link here that will take you straight to this video that talks about generic database insert and updates function. And so with all those done, it is testing time. We currently see that there are no records currently in these database tables. So now I'll enter some dummy information. I'll enter my password, I'll sign up, and as we can see, something happened. We have our user credential information. We have a record being created in the database with an ID of user number 1. So that's looking good. And now if we refresh on the page, we see the very first user is hereby signed up. And we did not store their plain text password. We instead stored the encrypted passwords, as we should. Perfect. All right, so now it's time to do the sign-in process. I'll make sure to note this password because I'll be using it for signing in. And so with the sign-in process, I want to do the exact same thing and take the username and password and sign in. So let's work on that. The great news is that it's very similar to the sign-up process. We're going to post information to this endpoint. And here, instead of calling sign up, we will call sign in. And we then need to create, of course, that function. So back into our user logic, where we'll copy this and then create the sign up version of sign up. Always validate user data. And then once I have that, I know that the user information will include the user's name and their password. So I need to then make sure that the user exists by doing an SQL query that checks to see if the name does match with something that we have on the database. If there are no records found, I will exit as soon as possible. If instead a record is found, I'll need to make sure that I take the database password and the database salt and use it in combination with the plain text user password that's passed in for sign in, and then convert that to a hash and then compare those two hashes. And if there's equality, then it means that the user is authenticated and they have access. And this is where JSON Web Tokens comes in. Once we know that the user's name and password are correct, we can then generate a valid token for the user by calling the previously created createSigned JWT and return that to whatever function called our users.signin. To round this all off, I just need to make sure I catch the results. And if it's null, I'll return invalid credentials. But if it is valid, I'll return the user objects. And since nothing is ever complete without a test, I'll enter the username and the very secure 123456 password. And we see we have an error. So I'll just make sure to update that there. It seems like it's concatenated too closely. So I'll just put a space there. And I think there was one other thing. Okay, I need to change passwords to password salt and try again. And the very secure password and sign up. Boom, we have the user ID and then the token that we created using our JSON Web Token, JWT. And there you have it, user authentication. That was a lot of code to walk through within 12 minutes. Thank you so much for sticking through with me. So to be fair, there's a few more steps that needs to happen in episode 6 regarding user authentication. Principally, I need to be able to store the token as a cookie on the user's browser, and then it's going to be sent to the server anytime the user makes a request to our API. However, we'll stop here for this episode, and I thank you so much for watching. If you haven't already subscribed, what are you waiting for? If you enjoyed the video, go ahead and hit the thumbs up button. My name is SolidusCode. Check out my other videos.